everyone. Good evening. Welcome to Hangout series of Regional Scrum Gathering India. My name is Ajit. Uh, I am an Agile coach with Senior Agile Consultant with Solutions IQ, and I have been working in Agile since last more than 5 years now, and I have experience of enterprise level transformation as well. I am one of the volunteers for RSGI this year and facilitator for today's session. We have some very interesting things happening in RSGI this year. One of them, which is Agile Coaches Clinic, so you can visit this specific Agile Coaches Clinic and speak to Agile coaches. Whether you want to talk about the process or whatever queries you have. Community concept this year in RSGI, which is called Agile Marketplace. We call it Agile Mela. So which is about a lot of people coming together, having fun, playing some games, and sharing their ideas, sharing their concepts in this area. We also have very interesting keynote sessions. One of them with a very different concept of mashup keynote, wherein multiple speakers are going to speak together, and each speaker has usually a time of 8 minutes. So you can always check out the scrumgatheringindia.com website. We have a dedicated specific agenda page there, which you can visit to check out the agenda. You can also Twitter. You can always use Twitter hashtag RSGI 2017 to have a look at upcoming events, other Hangout sessions, or any events which we are doing. You can also post your questions on the same hashtag RSGI 2017 while this session is going on, and we would definitely try to answer those questions. Now, in today's session, we have a very interesting topic, which Biase is going to cover with us, and he's going to present us with some very interesting facts and figures about Agile adoption in South Africa market. So I would request Biase now to give a brief introduction about himself and what we are going to discuss about. Biase, please.
Thanks, Ajit. First of all, thank you for the opportunity. I think it's very exciting from my perspective, and to be part of the Scrum Gathering in India. I'm looking forward to coming through and meeting with you guys and enjoy the culture, and it will be my first time in India. A little bit about myself. I work for a management consulting company called IQ Business. We're a management consulting company, 19 years old. I've been working at IQ Business for 18 years of those 19, so been here for a very long time. I'm a partner in the business, so been a partner for the last year. I look after the Agile service offering, and pretty much I think it's very similar to Solutions IQ. We go into organizations and help them with adoption, transformation, through training, coaching, and consulting work. I've been in Agile since 2010, so just going on to 7 years. We do software development ourselves as a business. We're a small team. We're 22 people in my team, from coaches and Scrum Masters, and we do software development ourselves, and we use Agile, Scrum, Kanban as our key choice of framework and approach to deliver. So out of necessity, we've had to change the way we do work. That was 7 years ago. That's my first engagement with Agile, and I fell in love with it. I call myself a recovering project manager because that was my background. Very much a waterfall, PMP, Prince 2 project manager at the time. But I think I saw the light 7 years ago, and I think I haven't looked back since. It's been a passion of mine, been able to share knowledge with others, train people, and actually make a difference in some of the organizations that we deal with. So very happy to be part of this journey.
That's really interesting. That's really interesting, Biase. Thank you.
So the topic that I'll be talking about for at the Scrum Gathering is we actually got another conference on Monday, Tuesday, which I'll be talking about the same thing. Is the what we call the State of Agile Index, or Agile Index South Africa. So being in this environment for the last 7 years, primarily working in the financial services industry, we deal with quite large transformations in scale in the banking space. Probably 80% of our work is in the banking space. And, it's been a personal dream of mine to want to run, there's the version 1 State of Agile that comes out annually from version 1. But it's very much a global perspective, and I think very much focused on the US market. And we haven't in South Africa. And there's always been a perception that in South Africa we might be 2 or 3 years behind the United States with regards to maturity of Agile adoption and the level of understanding as far as Agile is concerned. And it was always something that we wanted to try and test. About 4 months ago, I was, with my marketing team and some of my colleagues, we said we need to do this year. And so we launched it, and basically it's both a quantitative and a qualitative survey. So we spent some time putting together a survey and sending it out to the community, trying to get interest through social media, through our networks, through some of our partners and our competitors. We've got competitors here, but the market's quite small, so we do competition with them. So we work together on some aspects. And in parallel to that, I did qualitative interviews. So I did one-on-one interviews with some of the, industry leaders. So some of our other Agile coaches in other companies, as well as some of the executives in some of the companies that we work in. Perspective around their challenges, the maturity of Agile adoption in their space, and actually put the two together to provide a report. And I guess the talk will be about that. That will be, or not, I guess it will definitely be about the state of Agile in South Africa, but also I think to understand the South African environment and the Indian environment. So Ajit and I, we had a chat yesterday about it, and it would be very interesting to understand the dynamics between the two countries and how we rate to some of the other guys. I also interviewed Ellen Gottesdiener. I don't know if people are familiar with her, but she's written a book called Discover to Deliver. She was here. We hosted Ellen recently in South Africa, and also to get her perspective around being an outsider from the US and her experience in South Africa and how that would actually compare. The idea around that is obviously to provide a thought leadership piece that we can leverage out there and share with our clients and prospective clients, as well as the community. So through our Scrum user group meetup, through the Scrum Gathering in Cape Town, and start talking about it from a community perspective.
That's very insightful and interesting. Your topic, which you selected today, is also, I would say, quite says about what exactly is happening in South African market right now, and what are the challenges you are facing. So would you like to share with our audience some of the insights in terms of the organizations you have interviewed and the kind of people that has been part of this study, which I believe is.
Sorry, Ajit, can you repeat?
Information? Yeah. So would you like to share some information and the type of organization?
For some reason.
Yeah. So whether it would have been people experience in Agile, or are they just starting Agile? So what kind of spectrum has been covered in this study? That's what the question is.
Okay. I mean, I guess the quantitative piece was to the community. So it varied from from these small niche consulting companies that are doing agile coaching and consulting, all the way to our the largest banks in South Africa. For instance, we touched on Standard Bank. The kind of size in the IT space is over 6,000 people. ABSA, which is also the second largest bank from a market capitalization. Obviously, from a that's a quantitative. We couldn't really control who a lot of the banking environment, insurance environment. I think that's our core clients. So I think that would be easier to get that kind of perspective. But at the same time, in South Africa, the banks are the ones that are driving the large-scale adoptions across. They've probably been, and that's part of the kind of findings in the report, is that large organizations based on traditional processes are what we call the either early to late majority. From, if you think about crossing the chasm, from Jeffrey Murcott, crossing the chasm, they waited for everybody else to do it, and now I think they've realized that in order for them to remain relevant, to remain the employer of choice, that they've actually had to change the way they do things, and primarily driven from the IT space. So if I look at the demographics of the respondents, it was mainly in the information in the IT space, in the IT departments and business units within these environments, and I think that's part of some of the interesting findings that we've had. We dealt with, from a qualitative perspective, we dealt with very senior executives in these organizations that are responsible for driving the adoption in those organizations.
Okay, great, thank you. According to this study and the analysis you have done, which are the top 3 challenges in agile adoption that organizations are facing in South African market?
So I think firstly, I think they're not that different. So I think unsurprisingly, they're not that different from anywhere else. Having spoken to Mike Leber from Agile Experts in Austria, when he came to South Africa, and Ellen, and some of the international guys that we speak to, they're all pretty much the same challenges. I think the report was there to validate some of those challenges that we have. In the report itself, there's 5 key challenges, but I'm only going to touch on the 3. I guess I want to leave some of it for the talk itself. But if I think about it, a lot of these large organizations go through continuous change, from a restructuring, different methods, different approaches. So there's a lot of what we call change fatigue, and people are tired. This is quite difficult to do. I often argue as an agile coach that a lot of what we do isn't really about the process. I mean, Scrum is pretty easy to understand, difficult to implement, because primarily it involves people. And when you're dealing with the kind of changes that is required in culture and mindset, it requires quite a significant effort on change management and the people change management of that. There's a lot of ambiguity on roles and responsibilities, new roles, traditionally these corporates don't have roles called a Scrum Master or a product owner. And how does that mean? What does that mean for them? And those that don't understand necessarily are converting project managers to Scrum Masters. An interesting story, we went into an environment where the Scrum Master, the project manager went on leave for a month, and when she came back to the office, all of a sudden they asked her to be a Scrum Master without any conversation, and the person was like, what do I do? I don't understand what the Scrum Master is or does, and I think a lot of that kind of change process is there, right? People change. Now, when we talk about resilience in change, what happens typically is we engage with these champions in organizations, these change agents, for instance, at one of our clients, the head of Agile adoption, that's the role that the guy's been given. And people get fatigued. They get frustrated, because the thing is hard. It's hard to change hearts and minds of people, especially if they're so used to a specific approach and process over 20 years. They get blocked along the way, and it's difficult to keep focused and keep resilient at it, because this change takes time. And that was definitely one of the things that we found out in that, is that there hasn't been enough focus on people change management. So, for instance, one organization, they had a date. From this date, you will be agile, and that's the kind of communication that was out, and people well, don't even know what it means, and secondly, when they do drive it, people leave before they see the end of it, and we say, we want you to be resilient, we want to support you. This thing is going to take some time. In an organization of 25,000 people, 30,000 people, the kind of change is big, and it will take years to deal with. 3 years ago, I was sitting with the CTO of one of the banks, the chief technology officer, and they said to me, well, how long is this thing going to take? Because in next year, we've got to be agile. And I'm going, well, that's probably not going to happen. You're probably going to run between 5 to 10 years before you change the culture of the organization. And they didn't believe me at the time. But now 3 years down the line, they're still learning, and they're still making the adoption, and they're still going through the change. And they're not even halfway. So I think having a chat with him recently, he said, I remember what you told me 3 years ago, and you were right. So change management and the lack of change management is definitely one of the challenges. The other one is what we call middle management resistance. So what typically happens in these organizations is that the move to applying an agile approach or philosophy comes from the executive. So the CEOs, the very senior people. But they delegate that down. So they delegate that down to their management layer. And the teams at the bottom, they tend to like it. They want to make the change, and they see definite improvement. It's the way they work, and they enjoy it. But what they find is that the people in the middle are they're responsible for they're responsible for delivery. So they have a mandate to deliver. But at the same time, they've also got to transform the organization to an agile way of working. And what we find is that, based on performance management or their KPIs and KPIs, the way their bonuses are structured, that kind of behavior, they will always choose delivery over transformation. And transformation requires a bit of time. So what is the role of middle management in these organizational transformations? And kind of interesting enough, there's one bank that we work on where they realized that in the past and I'm not sure if it's very similar in India, but in order to progress to a very senior level in an organization, people would be promoted and promoted, but these are specialists, so they're specialist engineers. But in order for them to be at the top level, they have to become managers, either of people or of products. And what they've acknowledged is that some people are not really good at managing people or looking after people. So they've been given the manager role, but they're not very good at it. And they're not happy playing the role because they're really good engineers. So one of our clients have acknowledged that. And what they're doing now is they're allowing for the specialists to be promoted in the same line as those that are managers in the space. So they're providing a space for technologists to remain technologists. And I guess if you think about Daniel Pink and about the autonomy mastery, it's definitely about providing the opportunity for them to master their craft. So there's definitely that kind of understanding of what do we do with the management layer, definitely one of the challenges. And the other one is the role of the product owner and Scrum Master, actually, but I think more so the product owner. I think because there's always been this the silo between business and IT these traditional organizations. The role of product ownership isn't always understood, and it's always been, from a business perspective, IT need to deliver, and we'll hand over the work to IT, and we'll see them down the line in 9 months or 12 months, and hopefully they delivered what we asked them to deliver in this business requirements document or the specification. And what we need is obviously high levels of engagement, and that's always a challenge. So the role of the product owner has been quite a big lesson learned for us in focusing on how do we deal with product ownership, the role of the product owner, the engaged product owner. So not just the product owner from a title perspective, but how do we ensure that we have a product owner that is engaged with a team on a daily basis, driving the direction. And I think some of and I want to share some of our coaching approaches has changed a little bit to try and focus on empowering product owners and scrum masters to play their role more effectively. But I think we can touch on that a little bit more in detail later. So those are the ones. I mean, there are others, but yeah, if you want to talk about those, I'm more than happy to do that too.
That's nice, and not very surprising to see the problems, if not same, are actually similar. Everywhere the Agile adoption story is quite similar. So
absolutely, it's funny though. You say that. I mean, like everybody says, our environment is unique, and we always say your environment is unique as a next door neighbor, because everybody's got the same problems and challenges. And I think everybody needs to acknowledge that all we want to do is create better working environments to deliver better products. But you know, yeah, it is the same. It is the same kind of challenges that we have.
Yes, indeed. So thanks for that insight. So I would move to next thing. What I can think of is I would definitely like to know what activities do you think are important or change management in Agile? Just set of certain very important activities.
From a change management perspective, eh? Yeah, so I think one of the things that we need to understand is how do we change the hearts and minds of people that are undergoing this change? What we found is that when we get into environments, there's a lot of ambiguity, specifically around the roles and responsibilities. You know, when you're adopting a framework such as Scrum, you know, there's the role of the biz analyst, and there's the test analyst, and the product owner, and Scrum master, and project manager. So there's a lot of that conversation that happens, because if you put in something like Scrum in, there isn't a role for a biz analyst, as in the title biz analyst. It does not necessarily mean that analysis doesn't happen. And how do we deal with that? Because people, when they see the framework and they say, well, actually, I'm a project manager. I've been a project manager for 25 years, you know, and I'm really good at being a project manager. But now you're putting something like Scrum in, and I don't have a job anymore. So a lot of what we focus on and the change management activities is what are the benefits for them? You know, how do we make them better at what they do, to ensure that they are relevant, they keep up to date with relevant processes, frameworks, ways of working, because ultimately, you know, we've got to keep up to the changes of what's happening in the market. And I think when we focus on trying to clarify roles and responsibilities within teams, it goes a long way to opening the path for that. There's a couple of change models that we work with. The one is, not everyone's familiar with it, but we had the opportunity to work with a gentleman named Jeff Hackett from Chef. Yes, and he introduced us to what they call the ULSA model. And basically what that is about, there's what we call events, languages, structure, and agency. And in organizations, when the language is not possible. So in other words, it's not possible for us to deploy new products, new software into the production environment on a daily basis, or it's not possible for us to get a product owner from business, or it's not possible. That kind of language. When people are using that language because the existing processes constrain you, it just becomes the culture of the organization. And what we do is we're trying to identify these events, what we call the aha moments, where we start changing the language to say, well, actually, that team managed to deploy a production server using AWS or a cloud-based service in 9 minutes. Before, it used to take you 6 months to procure hardware. Now, because that team has invested in automation and in tools that Chef might, or whatever tools that are out there, we're now able to deploy and have a production-ready environment in 9 minutes. So you cannot tell me that it's not possible in a bank, because we've proven it in this team. So when we start changing the language through events, we start changing the behavior of people. And they see the value of that themselves, because it makes them better at what they do. And then they will be able to want to change the behavior and the culture of the organization. So it's all about creating those events through the process of coaching, and creating what we call those aha moments for people to realize, oh, actually, it's possible. So that's the kind of nature that we look at. We also realize that not every environment is exactly the same, even though they might have the same challenges. The context is very important. So you can't go into an environment with a specific framework for adoption, coaching or training or whatever. So we use, I'm sure everybody should be familiar with Jason Little's lean change approach. So we use a lean change approach and framework where we would spend some time generating insights into the environment through interviews, through observations, through assessments, running lean coffees to understand the environment a lot better. And then we work with the leadership team to try and understand what are the experiments based on hypothesis that we want to test. Experiments through a period of time, and we keep on doing this feedback-driven change. So those are that's the approach that we take from an IQ business coaching perspective. We sometimes challenged by some of our clients where it's kind of funny, they want to do an agile adoption, but they use a very waterfall approach to doing agile adoption. So we try and educate them to say, well, actually, we need to think about creating a change backlog, prioritizing that work, running these events, these initiatives based on priority, and getting feedback early so we know whether we're doing the right things and we're adding the right value into the organization. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Thank you. That really answers. Next thing which I would like to ask you is, who can help build the right capability in agile teams, and what should be the approach to do that? I believe that this question must have been there as part of analysis, that how do we build the right capability in the team, and who can help build that, and what approach should be taken to do that?
Sure. Thank you for the question. So, I mean, ultimately, I'm specifically referring to leaders, not necessarily managers. Okay, so leaders are, from my perspective, and I guess from a lot of people's perspectives, is there to enable the environment. I mean, I think their role is to allow the teams to be the best teams that they can be. So we talk about high-performing teams. We talk about self-organization. I mean, like a lot of conversation that we have around self-organization is about self-organization doesn't happen on its own. Self-organization also doesn't mean we're just going to go and be cowboys and just do whatever we want to do, right? We actually need some sort of structure, some sort of boundaries. So leadership is there to provide those boundaries from that perspective. I think Esther Darby talks about providing clarity and purpose, providing constraints, and talking about the necessary conditions for the change. So if we talk about conditions, that's what we're referring to. How do we provide the environment for these guys to do what they do? What we find from a coaching perspective is, and I don't know, maybe it's not new. We've been doing coaching, I think, even though I've been involved in Agile for 7 years, we've, as an offering, only been doing it for 5 years. But our focus has been on coaching teams. So we go through team coaching. And what ends up happening is that the role of the Scrum Master, which is a very scarce skill in South Africa, good Scrum Masters, we can't find, and I mentioned already the product owner. So what we find is that when a coach goes into an environment and we coach a team, they want to empower the team. So we go through the process of lifting off teams, training the teams, getting the some language, etc. They obviously they put a Scrum Master in place. But what we're finding is that the team reverts to the coach as the domain expert. Now, my argument is that the Scrum Master is actually a coach. It's a team coach. And if you look at the role that Scrum Master should play is exactly that. How do we educate the organization? How do we unblock the environment, not just at the team level, but at the coaching level as well? And what ends up happening, especially from us, because we're external consultants, right? So I'm sure you can understand, Ajit, like organizations bring in consultants because they're the experts. But what we want to do is create sustainability by ensuring that those Scrum Masters become the experts in their own right. So we've changed our model a little bit. And what we're saying is that instead of coaching the team, we actually want to coach the Scrum Master and the product owner directly. Through them, they will need to coach the team. So we want to empower them to be the best Scrum Masters that they can be and allow them in a safe-to-fail environment with their teams so that the team can see them as the Scrum Master, as the product owner, not this external coach. Then after 3 months or 6 months, the coach leaves. What ends up happening is they regress. So we need to think about that. The other thing, which I'm not sure if it's the same question, but what we found in the survey and the research report is that there's so much focus, there's probably too much focus on the process. So when we talk about what are the frameworks that people use, Scrum comes on top. It's version 1. The lower frameworks, or the frameworks that people don't use, are things like extreme programming. We understand. And when we talk about which practices people use, so things like daily stand-ups, most popular, prioritized backlog, retrospectives, reviews. So it's very process-focused. And what comes down lower are all the engineering practices, which is very interesting to me because, to be honest, if you think about it, we need to provide better software, better products. And one of the agile principles is about technical excellence. And there's people haven't focused on it. They're focused primarily on the process. So when we talk about building capability, we also need to focus on the engineering capability. And how do we create that environment in which people can improve their engineering capability to deliver better products and ultimately deliver value to the customer at the end of the day. And the way we do that is to say, well, engineering practices and improvements are first-class citizens. They belong on the same backlog and the same prioritization as your features and your requirements and your user stories. And you need to negotiate with your product owner to say that those things need to be built on. So time needs to be put, the capacity of the team needs to be focused on how to build that engineering capacity in order to improve their productivity and their delivery. So that's the kind of focus that we look at.
Great, thanks for that. We've talked about capabilities in teams, and we also had a touch base upon the roles you mentioned about Scrum Masters, product owners. So how do you see? You also mentioned you have a background of a project manager, Prince2 certification, PMP. How do you see the traditional roles can be mapped into in organization to, let's say, agile teams or Scrum teams, and how will people fit in? Are there any direct to direct mappings when the roles are switched?
So, I mean, there's a couple. So, so if you take the approach of Scrum as an example, right? So there isn't. So from a theory perspective, there isn't direct mappings from a traditional role like a project manager or a business analyst, which are probably the two roles that are most challenged. So if you're looking at something like Scrum, then you know it's very difficult to map the two roles. You know, what we normally do is, as an example, from a project management perspective, and having the background in the PMBOK, the project management body of knowledge, and please don't hold that against me, and still does in some aspects. But there's 10 knowledge areas, right? So if you map the 10 knowledge areas, so things like scope management, risk management, procurement management or vendor management, and HR, and all those, there's 10 knowledge areas. And what we do with our clients is we map those 10 items, and we say, okay, well, now you understand Scrum. So who plays that role? Okay, well, scope management, product owner. Product owner looks after the scope because of the product, you know, the backlog. Okay, who looks after the budget? Well, traditionally, it's the project manager. The sponsor provides the money, but the project manager does that. But who does that in a Scrum team? Well, the product owner is accountable for the return on investment. So the product owner needs to take ownership of the budget. Okay, so we do that kind of mapping, not from a role, but rather the kind of what are the knowledge areas, what are the things, the capabilities that are required. Now, there's one or two that doesn't talk about. As an example, how do we deal with procurement? How do we deal with that? So in a small Scrum team or a small organization, that gets handled by the team. But when you scale up to thousands of people, who does that? And that's why, rightly or wrongly, I don't know. I do believe in large organizations, the role of project management is still valuable. The role changes a little bit though. Okay, so allow the Scrum Master to focus on the team and getting high-performing teams, and we focus on the Scrum Master, obviously removing impediments and helping unblock the team, etc., and coaching and facilitating, and focus on the team. But the project manager discipline or the capability, if you're really strong at it, can help with integration with other teams, can help with integration with non-software teams, because when you're rolling out large line of business systems, you need to deal with teams like marketing or compliance or legal, which may or may not be agile. So how do you ensure that there's some delivery elements that integrates with the software team? So I do believe that there is still a role for project managers in large organizations. Not all project managers become good Scrum Masters. I'm sure you know that. And we always talk about mapping the attributes. What are the right attributes for a good Scrum Master? Traditional roles like business analysts, as I already mentioned before. We obviously want to create these cross-functional teams with T-shaped people. So I'm talking agile jargon, I'm sure. But we talk about the verb. We need analysis. So business analysts, because of their skills and they've been trained on it, certified experience, they're really good at analysis. And they can definitely help the team as far as doing that role and working with product ownership and supporting product owners in playing their role effectively. So to answer your question in a bit of a long way, but let's keep it short. I think if you're taking Scrum, very difficult to map the roles one by one. If you apply Kanban, which says respect the roles and continuously improve, there is a place for them. So yeah, I think that's the kind of approach that we would take.
Okay, great, thanks for that. So my next one would be on the basis of a study and analysis. Where do you see Agile going? What is the future of Agile, let's say, in next 5 or 10 years in South Africa market or the SM market? Where do you see going? What would be the expectations in terms of process and techniques in upcoming 5 or 10 years?
So so I might be a bit controversial, but I'm hoping that we don't call it agile anymore. I just hope it's just the way we work, and we don't have to label it. It's people don't walk around and say, hey, I'm a waterfall project manager. So hopefully in 5-10 years it's hit the tipping point, and it just becomes the way we do work. We'd have to figure out what else we have to think about to improve the environment, and people like yourselves and myself, Ajit, we need to find a different job or a different career, to help improve environments. But I think that's why we do what we do. We're passionate about, I'm passionate about improving delivery and people. So I'm passionate about how do we create better working environments. And I honestly feel right now, Agile is the best answer that we have. Maybe 5 years down the line, there's something else. I don't think it's going to go away. I think it's common sense. I think people are just going to naturally become part of that, especially with the younger generation, the millennials coming into play. I think they're naturally accustomed to this way of working. So I think it's going to be more like that. In the kind of philosophy or perspective, I think the trend is around business agility. So what will start happening is that most of our organizations, the agile adoptions are driven by IT because of the need for change. But what's starting to happen is that other business units are starting to find value in the way people are working. Marketing. So in our organization, we are at 600. I think we're 620 people. So when we started this journey 5 years ago, we were driving from a software engineering perspective. But 6 months later, our recruitment team started running Kanban boards or Kanban systems to manage recruitment. And that's the natural progression that will happen. We're obviously only 600 people. So it's going to take longer in larger organizations to be able to do that. So what does business agility mean? I like to say we're going to move away from the big A, so the agile frameworks and the processes, to the small A, where we talk about we want to be agile, as in agility, being able to, as a business, as an organization, be able to adapt to change to meet customer demands, and meet what's happening out there in the market. So hopefully that's going to happen. And Agile as a framework, as an enabler, Agile as a philosophy, but Scrum as frameworks and frameworks like that are enablers to get there. So I think it's going to spread out. So upstream, so upstream to the DevOps kind of conversation. How do we get operations involved and that kind of stuff? Downstream, sorry, and upstream to the customer. The customer is going to get closer to the business, hopefully. And it's going to be the value chain, hopefully, will be around, the whole value chain from concept to cash, operating in this way of working.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That we don't know what we would call, but yes, the base is being formed right now by the name Agile. So we don't know what we will call in next 5 to 10 years. That's correct. I agree to that. So just one last thing from you is, what do you think about the practices such as DevOps and your XP practices? So are these also being adopted at a level at which people are accepting the Scrum framework for process changes, or these are still lagging behind? How they are catching up now?
Yeah, I think the argument that I have is that I don't think it's necessarily different. Okay, so if you think about the core essence of frameworks like Scrum and XP, it's all about that. I think what's missing though is in the maturity in South Africa is the operation side. So a lot of the conversation is on the dev side. How do we automate builds? How do we do things like continuous integration, continuous deployments, that conversation? but not a lot has been spoken about the operation side. How do we keep the lights on, and how do we break down the silos between development and operations? So it is lagging a little bit. However, having said that, we are very interested in other banks in South Africa. They have every 6 months they have what they call Africa DevOps Day. So on the back of DevOps days internationally, they've now they get together as a community, sponsored by one. So the banks rotate. There are I would say probably 6 major banks in South Africa. Remember, we're very much smaller population than India. We only have close to 60 million people in South Africa, so a very smaller population than India. But we have 6 major banks. Our banking environment, by the way, is probably one of the very mature. Been rated that highly. I think that's probably part of the process of driving this DevOps kind of philosophy. And every 6 months, all the banks get together and they invite guest speakers. They talk about their experiences with Agile and DevOps, what they've learned, how do they share knowledge, which is kind of interesting. You wouldn't expect competitors to get together every 6 months to share some secrets, but it's very interesting. I've been attending the last 3. It's been going on for the last 2 years, so there's been 4 that's happened, and I've been to the last 3. So, and every time you see the progress that's been happening, the challenges that they have. So definitely from that perspective, I think that's the kind of conversation that's happening. I think there's also a conversation that's happening around the technical coaching. So how do we enable software engineers and engineers to become better craftsmen, better master their craft a little bit better. So there's definitely more conversation about that. I see starting to see consulting companies focusing on that too. Primarily trying to help organizations from an engineering perspective. But I think that's been lacking. I think just in general, basic stuff, like you go into organizations and like you don't find coding standards. I mean, like there's a basic stuff, that's missing.
Okay, so like I mentioned initially, so the conditions might be different, but the problems are similar.
Yeah, I think so. Okay. I think it's everywhere the same.
Okay, great. So I think that's it from this session, Biase, and thank you for all the insights. It's really great and really helpful. I am sure our audience will definitely have a lot of insights about the South African market, and your study is definitely going to help. So if you guys want to listen more to Biase, and he would be sharing his analysis and report in detail, so it would be great to hear him live in RSGI, and even I also look forward to meet him and have few discussions with him on his report. So do register on RSGI on Scrum Gathering India website, and meet interesting speakers who will share a lot of insights and from their experience and their. So hope to see you there. Again, thanks, Biase, for your time and this great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and looking forward to meeting you.
Thank you.
See you soon.
See you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.